Right, so this is part one to this new series, and what this new series is I'm going to try and go through a lot of the objects, views, and just generally things that are important, but you won't necessarily know without trial and error. So I'm going to try and help people out who are just getting into titanium. So what I'm going to do in this first one is I'm going to go through a navigation group and what that is and all that sort of stuff. So one thing to mention actually is I'm going to be using CommonJS through all of these examples that I'll be doing in the videos for this series, and probably any video that I do. I might do some on Alloy at some point, but this series is specifically going to be CommonJS, and I'm also going to have JSLint turned on. So what I'm going to do first is I'll show you how to turn that on. And JSLint is something which is like code validation, and it helps you out as you're going along and just ensures that your code is cleaned up. So if you haven't declared a variable, or there's a function being called before it's declared and all that sort of stuff, it just helps you out. It's good, it's handy. So to turn it on, you want to go to the Titanium Studio menu, Preferences, then Studio, then you want Validation, and then you'll just see it here, JSLint Validator, and just ensure that both of those are ticked on. That's if you want it on, but that's what I'm going to be using. So if you ever wonder what the little markers are on the side, then it's just those. So what will happen is, just a little example of JSLint, if I get rid of that semicolon there, then you see it lets me know that something's wrong, and then you can hover over this and it will say expected the semicolon but instead saw the end. So all you do is you add that and it sorts it out. So it's handy. So anyway, so yeah, so app.js is this file that I've got open, and what app.js is think of it as like your index window, index page on a website. App.js is the initial file which is called when your app is loaded. So what you want to do from here is you want to have a small amount of code, just enough to get the app started. So what I've got here is 2 lines. What I'm doing is, with CommonJS, the way it kind of works is, if you think of it of your code is separated into these separate modules or files, and well, if you think of it as files, so they're separated into these different files, and within those files are different functions. And within those functions you are returning, say, windows or data or whatever you want. But so what you do is you want to require a file, which I'm doing here, or module. I mean, I'll probably switch between calling it a module and a file, but I might stick to file for now because it might be a little easier to understand. So yeah, so we're requiring this file, and one thing to note is you do not add the .js at the end. So this is relative, so from the resources directory into control folder, then startup.js. But in the require statement, you do not add the file extension, okay? So what we're doing is we're putting that file into this variable. Then, using that variable, we're calling this function from within that file, okay? So what that function is doing is that function is returning our window, or in this case it's returning our window with a navigation group. So I'll just show that now. So I've already got the simulator up. So yes, when you launch the app you get this. Now this is our window here. You can think of this as like a page, and you can think of the different titanium objects and views as like divs. And if you think of the positioning in this, it's in terms of web development, it's absolute. It's not relative. Like put in a view here, and then declaring one after it does not mean that the second one will come below it. What you have to do is you just have to really think of it as being absolutely positioned. So you have to give it a top and left, or a bottom and right positioning. But yeah, we'll get into that into another video, but I just thought I'd mention that. So yeah, so this is the navigation bar, and this button here will open a new window which is part of our nav group, and this button here will return. So as you can see, I've got 3 windows set up, and these you can just flip between these. So what a nav group does, which is pretty good, is when you're going backwards through the stack of windows, it actually sorts out a lot of the memory management for you. So, sorry. So if you go into the profiling tools, which I'll also do another video about, is the if you go into the profiling tools, you'll be able to see that when you go back through the navigation group, the windows and the objects within those windows are actually being garbage collected and freed up from the memory. So it's quite good, it's quite handy. But it's one of those things, you don't have to use it. I don't necessarily use them all the time, but a lot of the time, they can come in quite useful. So yeah, so let's have a look at this then anyway. So that's what it looks like. So now let's go into this function which kicks it all off. So in my startup.js, I just have this one function, but this could have multiple functions, but for this, it just has one. Right, yeah, so this is the startup function. So let's get into that. So what we have here is useStrict, and this is just a thing with JSLint. It asks you to put useStrict at the top, and it's a JavaScript thing that just ensures that you're using strict JavaScript. An example of that would be if you were doing an if statement and you put two equal signs, it will give you a little warning at the side and it will say that it expects 3. So for those that don't know, 2 equal signs would be, say you did 9 equals the string 9, it could be true, but if you have 3 equal signs, it means the value and the type has to be the same. So yeah, it's just one of them, it's just strict. But yeah, so anyway, so what we want to do then, we want to declare all our variables at the top. So to begin with the nav groups require a container window which will hold all the windows. So what we've got here is our first window, or our main window, which is actually called main_win. It's just a window object, and what we've just set the background color, the width, the height, and the title. The title is example. We can change that to whatever we want. So if we just call my window, yep, so you can see here that title has changed to my window. I just noticed that said example there, but in the previous, like a minute ago when I was showing you the simulator, it said window title. That was just because I had already recorded the second half of this video, but the program crashed as it was recording. So yeah, so anyway, so just don't worry about that. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it, but anyway. So yeah, so title is what ends up in this bar here. So yeah. So right, so then we've got this button. Not going to go into that, just that it is a button, and open_win is the title of it, as you can see there. So what we're doing here is we're creating the nav group. And what we do is we've just got this variable and we put this navigation group object into that, and we pass it a window of main_win, which is here. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to add the nav group object to the window, and we do this so we can open child windows within the nav group. So what I mean by that is this here. So when we click this, we're opening another window which is part of that group. Previously, before I was using CommonJS or anything, this was really simple. I mean, you didn't have to worry about anything really, but now it's not more complicated. It's just there's just this extra you have to pass, because if you think of the functions in our require files or modules, they are self-contained and they're not aware of anything that's outside of that. So what we want to do is any information that they need, we have to pass it to them and let them know of it, if that makes any sense. But hopefully it will in a minute anyway. So yeah, so what we're doing is we're setting this parameter on main_win, which is custom parameter here, and we're just calling it containing nav. And what we're doing is we're putting this nav group object into that, okay? So here we have an event, and the event is on that button that I showed you a moment ago, which is, let's get back, which is here, this open_win button. And what we're doing is we're adding an event listener for when someone clicks it, and we're running this function here. So what we're doing is we've got this variable new win, and we're passing it. What we're doing here actually is we're requiring this file, but we're literally passing it the function to call as well, which is a bit different than we did in app.js. So what we're doing is we're requiring this individual function into this variable, and then what we're doing is we are passing it this containing nav, what we did here, we're passing it the nav group to that, so that window is now aware of the nav group and it's a part of that object. Then we are just doing the nav group, which is this here, open this new win. So that may seem a bit confusing at first, but if I show you this win2 file, which is here, win2 returns the window object. It doesn't open it, it just returns the object. So that is why if you look here, we're creating a new instance of a window object, then we're passing it this parameter, then we are opening it. And what we are doing here, the reason I'm passing the parameters is, as I mentioned before, if I didn't pass that and I ran the simulator, right, so now, sorry, I know that was just a second for you guys, but for some reason that simulator took about a minute to load up. So yeah, so I've commented out the passing it the nav group to this parameter of the window. So now when we click this, we're opening the new window, but we have not passed it the nav group. So now when I click open third win, it shouldn't work. Yeah, and it will give an error because it doesn't know about the navigation group. So that is why we pass it this, because it needs to know. For it to be able to open further child windows, it needs to know about this nav group that they're all a part of. It's just making sure that they're all together. So I'm just going to run the simulator again now. I've just clicked it with that line back in, so you can see that what happens. Right. So yeah. So now when we click this, it will open as normal because now it knows about this nav group. So we can flip between them and the rest of it. So that's why I'm doing that. And that for a lot of people can be one of the gotchas as well that comes up. But yeah, so it's pretty good. So now what I'll do actually is I'll quickly go through this little bit. Then we will go into this file and we'll look at window 2. We won't go through window 3 because window 2 and window 3 it's the same code pretty much, so we'll just go through 2. But anyway, but first, so what we do, so after this event we are adding our pieces to the main container window. So we've got container win.addNavGroup, and if you remember, container win is this here, and it's our main window which I mentioned will be holding the complete navigation group. So yeah, we're adding the nav group to the container win, then we are adding that open button to the main win. Then finally we are opening this main win. And if you remember from here, we are calling the start app function, and at the bottom of this start app function we open the window, which you might remember from a moment ago is a bit different to this win2 function, which doesn't open it but just returns it. We could just return this window and then here open it, but you know, I just seem to, I don't know why I started doing it, but it's just the way I tend to do it. Is my very first window I open, and the rest of them throughout I just pass the window object back. So then at the bottom of our function, what we want to do is we need to do this export.startup equals startup. Startup is the function name, and what exports do is it allows files that require this JS file to call this function and have access to it. If we didn't export it, then if we did not export this startup, let's do that actually. So say I didn't export this function and this is trying to call it, we should get an error when the app runs. We will get an error. Right, yeah, so this is what you get. Undefined is not a function, and that is because it doesn't have access to it because we have not exported it. So you always want to make sure you export your functions. if they are going to be required outside of that file. So now we've put it back in. Just quickly run it again. And as you can see, with that, the file now has access to that function because it's been exported. So anyway, sorry if that went on for a while, but yeah, I don't know, I'll cut all this up anyway. Right, so let's go back to this. So here, for the second win, requiring this file and then we're calling this function. So let's look at that now. So it's the same sort of thing, function name, at the very bottom we're exporting it, use strict, set your variables, create the window, create a button, open, well, add the button. Then we've got this event which is identical almost to this one here. Apart from, actually, this is something I will mention. So this is the initial window, and we would just pass in the nav group like this, and we would do a navgroup.open. But now on this second window, what we do is we have to do the window name.containerNav.open. Okay, so it's that little bit different, but it's not. It is, sorry, it is a little bit different, but it should still make sense. So as before, on this window object we've just created, we pass it this custom parameter of the nav group, but this time here, instead of it just saying nav group, it actually has to be current window dot the custom parameter name, and that's how you pass it to it. If we just put nav group there, it wouldn't know what it was unless we set it above somewhere else. So that's what you have to do there. So that's if you looked at that and didn't think it made much sense, but it's the same principle. It's just you have to make sure you pass it in the correct way, or else it will just come back as undefined. So then here we return the window, and this is, as I mentioned before, different to in this one where we open it. So because we've returned it, that's the reason why we had to use this open. But yeah, we had to do that to make it part of the nav group. So I'm sorry if I waffled on there a little bit, but I was trying to make sure I went through what's actually happening, but without I tried to not overcomplicate it. I don't know, maybe I did. But in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the same sort of thing, but as a tab group instead.